Welcome to Playthink, conversations about games, interactivity, art, and culture. This podcast is recorded live at the USC Game Innovation Lab, which is part of the USC Games program at the University of Southern California. For more information, follow us on Twitter at USC Game Lab or visit our website at gameinnovationlab.com/playthink. Okay, everyone, welcome to Playthink. My name's Tracy Fullerton. I'm a professor here at USC Games. And my guest tonight is Paul Slocum, who's an artist, a software developer, curator, and a musician based in Pasadena, California. He's director of the And/Or Gallery, which is a new media art gallery that exhibits digital art and develops software for digital art displays and music. He's also performed music and exhibited artwork internationally at numerous venues, including the New Museum of Contemporary Art and Andrea Rosen Gallery in New York, the National Center for the Arts in New Mexico, ReadMe Software Art Conference in Denmark, the Liverpool Biennial, Museum of Contemporary Art Denver, we can just go on and on here, the Dallas Museum of Art, and the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston. Thanks, Paul, for joining us.
No, thank you.
Absolutely. So to start us off, I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about your long history with And/Or Gallery, what it is and how it got started, and some of the artists and types of work that you've shown there over the years.
Yeah, well, it started originally as originally my partner at the time, Lauren Gray, had this idea to start a gallery, and I was kind of thinking the same thing. And my original idea was to do a nonprofit that kind of did performances, and then she found this. It was kind of the sequence of events. Like, she took a class actually on running a gallery, and then like found the space and started doing a thing with her friend, and her friend kind of flicked out, and I ended up being in the middle of it.
And this was back in?
It was 2005 when it was first starting, and the first show was January 2006.
Right. And that was in Dallas?
That was in Dallas.
Yeah.
And so I guess I through the internet and through doing shows and performances, I kind of built up a network of artists.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also I was influenced a lot by some stuff I'd been to in Europe. Well, you mentioned the ReadMe Software Art Festival in Denmark was a really big influence on me. Seeing how people in Europe they were just kind of doing these spaces that were like doing music and art and a lot of different stuff, and I think they were doing a lot in hindsight with government support,
which we don't have so much of. Yeah.
But I saw this, and I was just kind of influenced by that. I was kind of more of a little bit more on the music performance side of things then. I was going around doing stuff in Europe, so I was influenced by that. Anyway, so I just kind of was like, well.
But you wound up showing quite a few artists who would become quite prominent. Can you sort of give us some of the folks you showed?
Yeah, I mean, Corey Archangel was kind of essential. I mean, he was already a little bit big at the time, I mean, relatively. But yeah, I showed him. I mean, he was in our second show, and he's in the current show, and he's kind of been a key person throughout the whole thing. And then I guess it kind of branches up the network with him. Like, I've shown Jody early on, Paper Rad. We did a thing. I mean, we did a thing with YTM&D kind of early on, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, and you talk a little bit about. I read an article that you wrote about how you were showing that, which was unusual. How you actually grabbed the pages from some of the websites and found a way to display them, because it was unusual at the time to be showing websites and interactive art at all, but websites in particularly in a gallery.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a meme show, but the format of YTM&D kind of involves the entire HTML format. So yeah, we set up like rows of computers to show those.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of tapped into that network. I mean, and then we also, like, early on, I was also showing a mix of like, I showed Brian Ballad early on. He's like kind of gotten bigger now, but
Yeah.
he does more collage-y stuff, and which anyway, yeah. So yeah, it just kind of got going and got rolling, and we ended up showing some kind of cool stuff just through this network I had.
Yeah, and you told me when we spoke at the gallery that you actually wound up representing some artists. Either that or was in the article. I can't remember.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we started. I mean, it was run kind of like a regular gallery as much as possible. Um, and yeah, we wrote, and Petra Courtwright's another one, and I represented her early on. I was like I was the first gallery to sell her work and do like a two-person show, like a group show.
Which is, I mean, it's really cutting edge. This idea of representing digital media artists, internet artists, and also we're going to talk a little bit more tonight about game art and game artists.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not a natural thing that a gallery would represent a designer, an artist who worked in games, for
Right.
example. Yeah.
I mean, today it's becoming more normal, but yeah.
Yeah, but only in the very smallest way, right?
Right. Yeah.
there are
True.
there are obviously some games that have been collected by museums, and
Mm-hmm.
and there are some people who are represented, but it's still fairly unusual, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah. So currently, speaking of game art, you have a show up and running, which I actually got a chance to go see. And for everyone here, if you haven't made time to go out and see this show, you really should. It's a great collection of foundational work in games and their relationship to art. And so I love it. It's called Video Game Art 1970 to 2005. 1970, I think, predates a lot of you folks. So if you think about, wow, were they making video game art way back then? And it goes up to 2005. So you can talk a little bit about what's in the show, give us a little overview about what's in the show, and why you wanted to put together this group of games.
Yeah. Well, this is a show that I mean, it's something I've been interested in for a long time. And this is kind of the third show that I've done like this. It's sort of the first two were curated with my buddy Marcin Ramaki, and the first was at Art House in Austin, and the second was at Postmasters in New York. The first was in 2007 or 8, and the second
Pretty
was
early
in
on.
2011 or 12. And there's a lot of I think the only overlapping piece is the Mike Builds a Shelter piece, this 1983 arcade game that an artist Michael Smith made, that we restored for the first show. But yeah, like it's kind of a show that, I mean, 1970 is a little bit of a stretch because it's 1970 only because of Conway's Game of Life.
Right.
Most of the stuff starts kind of in the 80s.
Yeah.
But to me, Conway's Game of Life is kind of the beginning of it. I mean, to me, that's the earliest. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's something else, but there's nothing I can think of that really quantifies that whole thing so well. This sort of thing where it's sort of like, is this like, it's sort of this line between a game and the type of piece you'd see like at, say, Ars Electronica or something like that, and just an interactive piece or even a web piece. Like an interactive, like what's the difference between a game and just like if you change the game and remove goals and certain aspects of
And
it,
it stops
like
being game-like.
Like where's the
Yeah.
So anyway, the show is kind of about that line. It includes Conway's Game of Life, which is you guys are probably familiar with that, but it's sort of like a super minimalist Minecraft in a way. It's like a 2D ultra minimalist Minecraft with the most minimal rules and activity you can possibly imagine. And then I also include a similar game sort of based on cellular automata called Worms, which is
It's a beautiful game.
Yeah, it's just a pretty cool game, which I actually had when I was a kid, and it's one of Electronic Arts' inaugural releases from 1983, 82 or 83. And it's similar to Conway's Game of Life, but they slightly gamified it.
Exactly.
So, and it also has this like sound element that's really nice.
Yeah, I mean, when I played it, I thought how modern it was.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I remember it at the time. But now going back and you see how sort of what a milestone it really was in terms of
Yeah.
sort of visual art and games, right? And you're right, it does have this really strong relationship to Conway's Game of Life, but then it has that little bit of gameplay, and it's actually quite challenging.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's actually there's so much randomness in it when you know sort of move that you're not entirely sure what's going to happen,
Hmm.
but but there's enough game challenge to it that you don't feel like you're just dropping things in. Like in Conway's Game of Life, you just drop stuff in and you see what happens. It's
Right.
more of a
Well, you
toy,
can build
really.
structures and stuff like that. I mean,
Yeah.
you could gamify it. I was just thinking that you could kind of gamify Conway's Game of Life in certain ways if you wanted. I mean, that would be kind of strange, but
It might turn out a lot like Worms,
I
actually.
mean, ultimately, his goal was to make something that kind of, I mean, how did he, I'm trying to think how he put it. I mean, it's kind of like he tried to make something that would keep changing for a long time.
And
It
that
would
would
keep,
generate sort of lifelike functions,
like, if
right? So
you, I
like the
think that,
little gliders who sort of self,
yeah,
have motive power,
it's like a
right?
certain level of complexity based on, like, I mean, I think if you change the variables of his rules a little bit, it probably, things just collapse
Yes.
much sooner and easier. And
Yeah.
he kind of struck this balance with it. But anyway, yeah, so we have those. I'm trying to think. That's sort of one category, I
It's
guess.
the sort of the abstract, uh, very systemic visual experiences. Actually, when we were there, um, you had some really interesting representations that you had made of Conway's Game of Life.
Yeah, I've,
Can you
I've,
describe those a little bit?
yeah, I've worked with Conway's Game of Life for the last some odd years. Um, I wrote a script that takes a progression of Conway's Game of Life and turns it into. It takes the time that it's basically turns the space time into a 3D object. It goes over time. It stacks the layers into
Mm.
a just a singular object that you can see the like a progression of time. So and then I make prints of them.
They were beautiful
Oh,
prints.
thanks.
Yeah, I was
um,
really struck by them because that is something about um, the way that the game plays out, or the system plays out. It does become about the moment, right?
uh-huh.
And with these 3D layered prints, it was about the history. It was about this sort of almost like a motion blur,
Hmm.
of the time of passing. So you could sort of appreciate where the system had been and where it was going.
Yeah, I actually got, I was trying, I had this, I don't remember how I got, a long time ago, I got on this idea of trying to visualize, like, 4D space, like, visualize. And there's a science fiction author who describes it as, like, when we're born, it's like this vine, well, I'm not going to describe it well enough.
There's a children's book that talks about it that way. Um, a Wrinkle in Time.
Oh, that's
Yes, that's one
interesting.
of the first times I ever contemplated it as a kid.
Oh, yeah, that's really great, yeah.
The little kid.
I wa-
Yes. What was the kid's? The Charles?
Yeah, Charles Wallace.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's the first one to ever introduce me to that idea.
Yeah. But anyway, well, I won't go off into it because I'll butcher it. But yeah, I was trying to visualize, and then I realized, oh, I could just take a 2D space and then like turn that into an object, and it kind of gives you a sense of it. Like you can
Yes.
get,
It's like a gesture at it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, and you could. I've thought about doing it with other, because you can do it with other games. I've thought about doing it with like. I don't know. It's a project that's kind of on my to-do
Yeah.
list of doing it with like you could do it with Mario Brothers, or it would be. I can't think of what games I thought
Well,
were best now.
you should talk with Todd, who's done quite a lot of bit of work with the Game of Life. Todd Formansky's here
Oh, cool. Hey.
in the room, and have built actually a VR version of Game of Life.
I put my 3D structures in VR. I tried that too.
Yeah, it's a little trippy to be honest.
The problem I had was the structures have so many surfaces in them that it really taxes it. You can't render it it taxes your graphics card too hard. I couldn't get a good frame rate.
Yeah, well, maybe you guys could collaborate on
Yeah.
that. And there was just before we move off of Game of Life, because I want to talk about a lot of the other projects that are in the show.
Yeah.
You also had this really hard to acquire piece, the Video Life, which is the Atari 2600 version of Game of Life, right? And as I understand, only 20 cartridges were ever made, and it was available only through special mail order. And I looked it up, and on its Wikipedia page, they report that cartridges sold for as much as $3,000 at the time, which today would be about $9,000. So just out of curiosity, how did you acquire this really special artifact of this?
It's a replica.
It's a replica, okay. So what are you were mentioning to me some constraints though? Even the replica though is valuable in a way because you have to recreate it again, right?
Yeah, we did have to get it working. But yeah, I probably could have borrowed an original from my collector, but I just kind of didn't want to deal with the liability.
Well, that's what you and I were talking about, is that you have it as one of the first pieces you see when you walk into the show, and there's a problem, obviously, that people could just take the cartridge.
Yeah, probably not many people are going to know, but I just couldn't. I mean, it would be, it was like with the arcade games and that, it would like be over my insurance limit actually, and I couldn't.
So they came and took it. But can you talk? You were talking to me about the control system a little bit, and it wasn't really what we call released commercially so much. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's true. Yeah, it wasn't. It certainly wasn't on. Yeah, it was. You had to get the super rare cartridge, and then through that you could mail order this one. So yeah, it was.
And then there was the different controller, right? What did you
I
use?
just rigged that up.
You
to
just
make
rigged
it a
that
little
up?
bit,
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
normally you use a second joystick with you just hit the button, but I was trying to
see.
make it simpler so people could just sit down and kind of mess with it.
I see. Okay.
But I mean, Common Ways Game of Life. It's not like there's an original version that you can just show from 1970. It was. I mean, maybe he probably wrote some code.
Well, he did it on the floor.
Yeah, it was more of a. I mean, I think he wrote an article. I think
Yes,
and it was
and
published.
then other people turned it into computer simulations.
So I had to find. I mean, originally I was thinking I would have some kind of touchscreen interactive thing, but then I remembered this version, and I thought, oh, this is a great way to show it.
And it's a nice entry point into the show to take something that, in a way, predates the computer game industry, and then show it on one of the earliest successful consoles of the game industry. So it's a nice way to sort of enter the show, which you have it in the entryway. But so I'd love to talk about some of the other games in there, because there's some really fascinating artifacts. And one of the highlights for me, anyways, was the original Tetris prototype that's running in Russian on an Electronica 60 mini computer. And that was really something to experience for me. It's because we're all familiar with the sort of commercial version with just like catchy music and Cold War graphics and the kind of packaged up version of it. But this is very different. I mean, the gameplay is the same, but the packaging is gone, right? So that can you talk a little bit about this piece and give us some background on it? You were telling me a little bit about the story of Tetris.
Yeah, I mean, the Tetris, including Tetris, is. I mean, I'm not totally sure how it fits into the show entirely, but I kind of just wanted to see
artwork,
it.
Right?
It wasn't actually even at the opening because it was difficult to get set up and working. I mean, I bought it's running on a Raspberry Pi that's emulating.
It's emulating. Okay.
Yeah, it's emulating the the Electronica 60 is a PDP-11 clone.
Okay.
And so it's emulating that, but it's running over a serial port onto a real serial terminal.
Okay.
But yeah, sorry, I'm blanking on his name.
Alexei Paginov?
Yeah. I mean, he was an artificial intelligence researcher who wrote games to test hardware, and that was one of the games he wrote, and so it became popular and kind of was. I mean, there's not maybe there's some full history of it, but it seems like it kind of was pirated basically. I mean, it was somebody ported it to DOS, and then it was kind of dubiously licensed, and he gave the intellectual property to the Soviet Union for 10
Yes.
years. So he didn't start making any. I mean, Western companies were just making money off of this game left and right. Well, and also I guess Japanese companies were making money, a
Because
lot
it
of
was a
money.
huge hit
Yeah, it was a
on the
huge
original
Nintendo
Game Boy.
hit, and it was
Yeah.
also a big arcade game too.
Yeah.
Um, and so in the mid '90s, he finally formed a company that I think he finally started making money off of it. But I mean, it is the best. I think it's the best-selling game of all time. Is
I
what
wouldn't be surprised
it's
if that's the
listed as
case.
as the best-selling game of all time.
Yeah.
It's partly because I mean, it was on so many. It's just endured, and it's on mobile. I think mobile is part of the reason it's rocketed so much in sales. But
Yeah, and it was everywhere. I mean,
yeah,
it might have been best-selling for lots of people.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
the answer to.
yeah.
Wasn't necessarily best-selling for Alexei.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because it's such it's such a simple game. It's a really simple idea, but it's just this it's kind of it's really strange to see I wanted to just see the original. It's done in text with
Yeah, that's what I was going to
ASCII
say. This is
characters.
just these little brackets, and it's very, very simplistic. And then, of course, the whole interface is in Russian. So when you're playing it, you just have this, I don't know, this strange sense um, of looking into the past, because even the modern versions are so uh, packaged. They're just so familiar. And to look at what he was looking at when he was prototyping it and deciding how many blocks there would be, right? And you just look at that rough ASCII text, and it just, in a way, to me, it just felt like it opened up a door to the past of games
Yeah.
in a really special way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that we don't get when we play the modern versions.
Yeah, it plays really really well. So surprisingly, over a terminal like that. I mean, it's sending terminal commands to reposition the cursor, and it's redrawing different parts of the screen all the time to do it. It doesn't scan the whole thing. It just draws what it needs to. It's written. I mean, and it runs really well. The only difference is it doesn't show you the next character.
That's what I was
the
going to say.
next piece
It didn't
coming.
have the preview.
That's the only
Yeah.
difference in that.
Which, as it
gameplay.
turns out, is a really interesting sort of dramatic addition to the game, right?
Yeah.
So when you know it adds a lot more strategy.
It's a really good addition to add that.
Really
But it
good
still
addition.
plays really well. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. But so let's jump. Speaking of opening up the past a little bit, let's jump to a piece it's actually pretty famous on the internet, right? It's maybe one of the better known unreleased games in video game history. I want to talk about Desert Bus. And for those who aren't familiar with the piece, it's basically a bus driving simulator, right? And made by Penn and Teller. And you want to tell us a little bit about it and it's sort of why it's in the show?
Yeah, it's a game that was made in 1995 for the Sega CD system, and it was never released. It was intended to be released commercially, and it's part of a collection of games called Penn and Teller Smoke and Mirrors. But Desert Bus has become the most famous one. I think that I've been meaning to go through all the games, but I haven't had a chance yet. But my understanding is they're all joke games or sort of magic tricks built into a game, except for one, which is like a platformer. It's a real game. But the one, Desert Bus, is one of the joke games on there, and it's the most famous one. It's kind of the best of all of them. But you drive a bus from Tucson to Las Vegas. And the bus the bus can only go 45 miles per hour, and it's in real time, so it takes 8 hours in real time. And there's
just literally keep going forward.
There's not really any scenery or turns or obstacles or traffic, but the bus pulls to the right a little bit, so you constantly have to maintain it. and the start button that normally paused only operates the horn, so you can't pause.
You can't pause. You have to just keep driving.
Um,
Sometimes the major occurrence on the trip is that a bug can hit your window.
a bug hits the window 5 hours.
And it's
into
fascinating.
the,
You're like, oh my God.
But it's 5 hours into the trip that the bug hits your window. And
Right.
then when you get there, after 8 hours of driving, when you get there, you're given the option to drive back. And you get 1 point when you arrive. You get a point for driving back, and it takes another 8 hours. And as you drive back, the sun slowly sets.
It's crazy.
And I mean, when I heard about this, I mean, I think it was unveiled. Somebody found it in the mid 2000s, I think. Or when I heard about it, I was like, I got to be in one of these shows because it fits with the other pieces that we'll talk about in a minute. But I mean, it's a lot like. I mean, it's basically like work that was being made by artists in the 90s and 2000s.
It's a high concept piece.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of insane.
It's
that
also really like wonderfully illustrated as well.
Yeah.
It like looks like a really kind of awesomely made.
It looks like a commercial
Sega
game of
CD
the time,
game
right?
with
That's
kind of like
the
the
thing.
graphics. Like it's really well illustrated. Like when you like run off the road for too long, this tow truck comes and tows you back to Tucson
You just
in real
start
time.
over again.
So however long you drove, it takes that long to drive you back. But it doesn't show the tow truck. It after a while you just see the light illustrated and the like tow truck's light going, and then you hear the sound, and then you see that the bus has been lifted up, and then it starts towing you back. It's just like the way it's really like wonderfully done.
It is, and what's really strange to me is that, in a way, it's the predecessor of walking simulators, right? I mean, it has this ambivalence about gameplay. It's got that pull to the right, which keeps you on point, and it's sort of the challenge. You think it's going to be boring, and then I sat down to play, and we were talking while I was playing, and I didn't want to stop. Like as a game player, I didn't want to let go of that button that was driving the bus forward. I kept thinking, well, any minute now something's gonna happen, and I'll feel like stopping. But I didn't. I just kept correcting and course correcting and course correcting, and I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna be here for 8 hours. It's actually more compelling than it's going to be.
Right.
When you describe it, it's like, okay, I'll never play that. But then it's actually weirdly hypnotic in the same way that driving a desert road is hypnotic. Yeah. So I really love that one. So let's talk about some of these other pieces, though. You actually mentioned that you'd shown Jody really early on. Before this show, I think you even did a whole show.
Yeah, they were the show before this.
Yeah. Right. And so Jody is part of a genre of game art that involves sort of hacking the code for commercial PC games and changing the game experience. And you have actually a couple of pieces, some by Jody and some by others, where that's kind of the idea, the conceptual idea behind the art is really going into something commercial, taking things out, stripping things out. Can you talk a little bit about that sort of idea?
I mean, an interesting thing when you're like an artist trying to do something with games is that making games is like insanely expensive. So like if you want to do certain things, like hacking games is kind of your only option, really, because like if you wanted to create like a Grand Theft Auto 5 like type unit, I mean, like the game would cost like like $200 million. I mean, probably a lot of that's marketing, I'm sure, but still, like it's a lot of money. It's like a lot of people like designing assets for like many hours.
Which is why we see sort of indie art games going down an entirely different aesthetic path.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
it's like partly the reason the 8-bit graphics are popular is not just the aesthetic, it's partly because it's more practical.
Yes.
But yeah, so I mean, I think there's a variety of reasons to do it, but yeah, Jody, I mean, the piece we're showing is a hack of Quake, and they did, it's like this, well, they basically put little checkerboard patterns on every surface, and basically when it renders, it just renders kind of everything to more A patterns because it's trying, like it doesn't have any aliasing, so it just kind of, everything becomes this crazy patterns.
It's
So it
super
becomes kind of
crazy.
just like this visualizer. Um, and they did a bunch of series of minimalist hacks like this. There's like ones of Doom, Quake. There's like a old Spectrum game that they did, and most of their early work is like that. But I really love this one. That's kind of the tiny checkerboard one that
It
just
calls
becomes.
attention to process, like the
Uh-huh.
process of games, right? The sort of not only the processing power, but just like what is this artifact that we're looking at? And
Yeah.
it, by changing just the surfaces of it, you actually begin to see it better in a way.
And part of what's great about the game is that the sound is unmodified, so it's just like ah. Like, it's
Yes.
just this like abstraction.
It gives you some context against all that
Yeah, it
abstraction.
really. I mean,
Yeah.
that's part of what's great about that piece is the sound with it. I mean, it looks like something it just looks like a visualizer you'd see from some minimalist like electronic band, like a live performance or something. It just kind of becomes a visualizer. And then we showed another piece by and that's from. They worked on those in like 98, 99.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that piece is technically tied from 2000, but they were working on a bunch of series of those around that time. And then we showed another piece from 2000 by Jean Leandra, and he hacked for this one. He hacked Revolt. It's like a
Is this that driving one that I played?
yeah.
Yeah, so you're
Revolt was
driving in like nothingness.
it's like an RC car racing game from like
Yeah.
the 90s, late 90s, and so he's hacked it. So it's similar to Jody, where it just becomes this crazy abstraction that's kind of playing with the engine. Some of the levels are sort of playable, but it's not really that playable. It's kind of just more like becomes sort of a
You
weird
can't tell what
activity.
is up and what is down, and you still quote unquote know how to drive, but it's not respecting, but the visuals are not respecting your understanding of what driving is anymore. So
Yeah.
and so it just becomes wildly abstract.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It has good sound too.
it has good sound. Yes.
And yeah, so like Jody's what you usually see of that stuff. But
Yeah.
I thought it was cool to kind of see a contemporary of Jody who's doing something similar, who's not Jody.
Yeah.
And and then we have a Corey Archangel piece that's also a hack. It's and the Super Mario Clouds is probably the most well known.
Yes.
But I'm showing one that's a little bit later. That's a sort of a variation on that. It's this MiG-29 game, and he has two hacks of it. One is actually clouds that are similar to Super Mario Clouds. Another one's this big plane. So it's just another. I wanted to show one that wasn't Super Mario Clouds.
As overseen.
And then we showed it alongside these modifications to Super Mario Brothers by this artist, Mafalme Ashmore, which was actually done 2 years before Super Mario Clouds.
Yeah, when I walked in, I thought that it was going to be Super Mario Clouds.
Right.
And for those who haven't played, it's basically, Super Mario Clouds is essentially just taking everything out of the game.
Yeah, he took everything out of the game but the clouds.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how he often described it. But finally, Ashmore she took everything out of the levels.
Yes.
Like, so she didn't remove the ground or the Mario or the clouds, but you can still walk around, but there's nothing else there. So all you can do is walk around until the time runs out.
Which is again another reference to sort of more modern art games, which take a lot of conflict out and become more experiential, right? So I find a lot of these almost sort of prescient of the ideas that we're seeing in modern games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I cut it off partly at 2005 just to avoid having to like.
Well, that's when the explosion happens.
Yeah, it would
right?
just be such a more complicated show to like. I don't know. It would just open it up to a whole different thing that would make the show kind of difficult to deal with. And so I just thought that's a good point to cut it off, and it's kind of encapsulates in this era right before it kind of expands.
It's before the real democratization of the tool sets. It's before people like Jason Rohr start releasing games.
Yeah,
or
and we
Genova
had
Chan
Jason Rohr in one of our shows.
Yeah.
Which and yeah, that one went a little more in that direction. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this one we cut it off there.
But I mean, what you do by cutting it out on that date is you actually put a lens on the work that these people were doing before before there was a large community around sort of experimental and art games, and before the tools were readily available to a lot of different people. So you sort of putting a lens on people who were very prescient, people who were thinking way ahead in a lot of ways. In fact, one of the ones I want to talk about, which is almost unplayable, but I really enjoyed it anyways, is kind of predictive of the entire genre of serious games. So that's the Mike Builds a Shelter arcade game. So there's a whole series of arcade games, and one of them is this game where you're basically trying to build a fallout shelter before the bomb goes off, so that you can survive, the nuclear holocaust, right? When I played it, it's so hard. I couldn't. Just the way it's designed, it's like you almost can't even get the character up the staircase. That's pretty much all you have to do is go up and down this staircase. But it's designed to make it super, super hard to do that one task. So you're almost invariably going to lose.
Yeah, well, it's actually, I mean, it's made excessively slow.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they were, it's part of an entire installation that they made of this. It was based on this government-issued pamphlet that explained how to make this fallout shelter in your basement that doubled as a snack bar. And it's like when the bomb alarm goes off, you're supposed to like pull this thing down, and you have to put these cinder blocks in to fill in that like the pass-through area where this like the part where you sit at the bar. So you fill that in, and then go in there, and you have your rations inside, and you wait out the fallout, I guess.
I couldn't make it past the first step.
So this game is from 1983, and they built the fallout shelter from the pamphlet and how it was this whole show. And he later did a video that went with it too, and it showed it. It showed it in New York, and it showed it in the New Museum in the 80s. And so I restored the game in like 2007. We recovered the data and restored it. But
built the whole cabinet, and you had to get a new programmer, someone to reprogram, right? I think you told me, or was that you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
well, we didn't reprogram it. I made it, but I mean, I made a few changes.
I felt like we talked about a young programmer, not you, but someone else.
Yeah, when they originally made it, they did. It was written by a guy, like a high school.
High school. That's what we're talking. Yeah.
In
okay.
1983. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Which is kind of interesting that this is, who can do this for us at the time is probably a young person who's just fiddling around with the tools, right? Yeah. But it's, nowadays, obviously, there's a whole, genre of games, serious games, where we use games to talk about, topical affairs and current issues and things like that. And here we are, 1983, and you see this already. You see it emerging already.
Yeah, I mean, it was really, it was kind of, it's the earliest attempt I know of to make sort of this kind of bad game on purpose type thing.
Yeah, interesting. Bad, because I'm sure, I can't remember exactly the year, but it's going to be around the same time as Balance of Power by Chris Crawford, which is also about the Cold War.
I don't know that.
It's a PC Mac game, and you play as a world leader on either the U.S. side or the Soviet Union side, and you're trying to keep the world from exploding into nuclear war through various. It's a simulation game. It's not supposed to be a bad game like this one is. It's a really difficult simulation game.
Yeah.
And almost invariably you would fail. At least I did. I failed and failed and failed and failed. But it was one of the first games that I ever remembered that was about something. It was about this idea that we were on the verge of nuclear war.
Right.
And it's interesting that it was a similar topic. Obviously, that was a very, very prevalent worry.
Yeah. I mean, there's several games. I've been kind of fascinated by games like there's Raid Over Moscow and I just found out that there's this game, Communist Mutants from Space, for the Atari 2600. I found out there was this thread. I never heard of this. They removed the word communist from the game in Europe but they didn't change the packaging, so still has this ridiculous illustration. But then they actually just removed it from the
So it's like
title.
X from outer space. I mean, they don't.
Yeah, it's just mutants from outer
Mutants.
space.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, mutants. Just mutants. They're not communist mutants. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
it's kind of weird wondering how that decision happened that they didn't actually change the pack. I guess maybe the cost of reading the illustrations or something was more. I don't know.
Nice. So those were some of my favorites. What are some of your favorites that I didn't bring up?
Oh, let's see. I think we covered. Didn't we cover? I think we covered everything, didn't we?
Well, we didn't talk about the
We didn't talk
rest of
about
the
the arcade
arcade
games.
games,
Yeah.
and I know
Okay.
there were some that you really that you got well from Van Burnham, right?
Yeah, I mean the arcade games were. I mean, they're sort of context for the show in a way. I mean, they're not. They don't entirely fit perfectly into the show, but like, I mean, they kind of do in a way. But they're like they were. They don't fit squarely into the show. I think they're really. I mean, okay, so like I mean the idea was that we were gonna have Mike build a shelter, and then I found out I could get these. Like this woman has this amazing collection of.
Van Burnham, who wrote Supercade.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
She has a like very large collection of games from 1980 or 19 generally 1975 to 1985.
Hmm.
Um, and so I guess when I saw her collection, what struck me was there were these games that I've never seen before or heard of at all. Um,
There was one that was. You said it was. You called it the first indie, like independent
I mean, I was kind of comparing
arcade
to that. I
game.
mean, it's a little bit of a stretch, I think, to compare them to indie games. I mean, I mean, they're kind of unsuccessful games in a way. They're kind of made by companies that were kind of. I mean, it's different from indie game has this sort of for lack of a better word, artisanal element to it that I
Yes.
think they didn't quite have. But I mean, one of the okay, well, I mean, I made a list of all the ones I'd never heard of before, and that's kind of how I carried it. I ended up choosing ones that were basically from the same era as Mike Builds a Shelter, and
Got it.
they're
So they're
I think
contemporary.
they're all
Yeah.
81 through 83.
Okay.
Um, but so I'll just go through them. I mean, I got NATO Defense, which is this kind of goofy game made by a company I think in Southern California called Pacific Novelty, and they put out these games that had a tape deck and like they had a car stereo tape deck in the back of them with a cassette on auto reverse that they could play audio loops in the games. NATO Defense has, as you play, it has this radio chat. It's like it's a war. I think it's a
So
World
you're
War III
hearing
game.
a radio show.
Yeah, well, it's radio chatter. It's
Uh-huh.
like, it's like you're listening to the CB
Oh,
channel.
oh, oh, okay, okay,
Um,
got it.
so it's like it's like them talking. It's kind of airplane movie esque, like kind of comedy, sort of Hogan's Heroes, maybe kind of like dated comedy routine. Anyway, I was partly just curious to kind of play it and have this experience of hearing this thing that they like. I mean, I think it's funny they read a script and like did all those things, so it's kind of interesting
And
to
it's
listen
weird to just put it in the like a tape deck in the back of the arcade. I mean, usually, one of the reasons that this meme of arcade sounds is like beep beep,
Yeah.
is because of the limited technology for making sounds
I
at
mean,
the
digital
time.
sound came along shortly after that, but
Yeah.
still, there was not. I don't think there was anything that. I
Yeah.
mean, there were a few games, I guess, that had a little bit of speech or something, but for the most part, there was nothing like that with like a long thing of. I mean, I think it's about 8 minutes
Of
the
chatter.
tapes. Yeah, it's
Interesting.
about 8 minutes.
And there was one you showed me that was really just a skin. It was a
Yeah, I mean
reskinning.
that one kind of fits into the show the most. I think there's this game called The Glob. I wish I had pictures of it.
Well,
It's
there are some on the website, so people
yeah,
can go, and I encourage everybody to go to the show. So
yeah.
yeah,
Oh, and
it's still open,
the
right?
show is listed as ending at the end of the week, but I'm going to extend it another week, so
Okay.
it'll be up
So
through the first
so
week.
go
of
before it
next month.
closes.
Um, but anyway, the Glob it only ever existed as a conversion kit for Pac-Man. Um, so it's a set of ROMs, I think. It's panels to replace the artwork. It has instructions on how to paint it, which is like kind of vague. It's kind of like paint it like a kind of a spattery. I don't know. It's like anyway. So you're supposed to like
Just to destroy one of the most successful games of all time and replace it with
Yeah, I mean,
the
apparently it's
cloud.
notorious for as being a way to make your Pac-Man machine make less money.
Yeah,
Because it's like this
exactly.
obscure game nobody's heard of, and the illustrate. I mean, partly I love it. 'Cause, I mean, that's interesting in itself, but also the illustrations and the artwork are really kind of hilarious and strange. They almost
Yeah.
look like Robert Crumb or something like that. Um, and it's a pretty good game. Also, I wanted games that were actually kind of fun because like the show is all stuff that's kind of intentionally not fun in a way. So it actually makes the show kind of nice because like right in the middle of it we have these four
So,
like kind of really
something
striking arcade
playable.
games that
Yeah.
you can actually play and like
Yeah.
are, um,
Yeah.
and then we have a game we have a early this rare early vector color vector arcade game called Boxing Bugs. It's sort of like this bizarre version of Asteroids where you're a giant fist that punches bugs. um, and then we have Slither, which is a Centipede ripoff.
Yeah.
Um, that's actually pretty good.
I played that one.
It's a
That was good.
trackball game, and
Yeah.
it's a lot like Centipede, but you can shoot up and down, and you can move all over the
Oh,
level.
right. That's what it was kind of freaky because having played Centipede so much, I kept hanging near the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Later,
there's this, you're sort of coded in
yeah,
your brain that you think you have to stay near the bottom of the screen, and then with this game, you don't have to, but it's so much like it that it's weird that you can't make yourself. Um, but one thing I should say is that we're talking about these abstractly. We're not showing pictures of them. They really are worth playing, even if some of them are sort of like Desert Bus or whatever, meant to be not very playable. And they actually do, when you play them, reveal they reveal very different experiences that are unexpected. So I
yeah,
just encourage going out and playing them.
yeah. I mean, I had watched. I mean, you can easily watch a video of Desert Bus, but
It's not the
I kind
same.
of wanted to see it on, and almost all the stuff is running on CRT, so it feels pretty authentic. We're running a lot of stuff off Raspberry Pis. Um, But if you run a Raspberry Pi with composite video on a tube TV, you really can't tell much difference. I mean, I don't think I think most people can't tell any difference. I mean, I think an LCD doesn't look that great, but yeah, it's a pretty nice experience.
Really
Yeah,
authentic and different feel.
yeah.
Yeah. So I want to make sure we have time for some questions. If people have questions before we wrap up, do people have questions for Paul? I can keep asking questions, just to be clear, but if you guys have questions, raise your hands. One thing I was going to ask while folks are thinking is, the students here at USC Games who are studying game design and development they're encouraged to seek out inspiration for their games very widely, and I'm actually often encouraging my students to go out to theater, to galleries, or alternative experiences to broaden their kind of creative palette. And so, what important ideas do you think that our students could take away from this kind of prehistory, this of today's art games that they could experience at the gallery?
Huh? I don't know. That's a tough question. I don't know. I've been thinking about that. It's like it's a little hard for me
It
to.
inspires you, obviously, in your work, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is a little hard for me. I've been trying to kind of quantify how all this fits into how this kind of fits into like the current state of things. And I mean, I think these ideas. Well, I guess I'm kind of I'm into these really minimal games. Like I feel like this idea has. I guess yeah. I'm into this kind of. How do you describe what it is? I mean, it's almost a little bit of a punk attitude. I hate to say
Yeah.
this, but it's a
No,
little
I
bit
think
of
that's a
punk
great.
attitude about games. It's like
Yeah.
doesn't kind of exist as. I mean, games have. I'm not super into the scene that's developed now. Honestly, I mean, I don't want to be super negative about it, but there's just. I mean, it's gotten huge. There's all these different areas of games and indie games and stuff, and like a lot of it I'm just not as into. I mean, I play games all the time, but I don't play that many indie games for some reason. I don't know.
I like the punk, sort of analogy. I think there's something very raw in these games.
Like Jody just made this new piece. Like Jody's made a variety of different stuff, and they're kind of my favorites. Like they've done so much stuff, and they're so consistent. I think they're. But anyway, they made this new piece that it's tic-tac-toe, where you play against like 5 different AIs at once. But one of them's like they range in intelligence from really smart to really dumb. I mean that like I don't know why I'm bringing. I mean, I feel like this kind of quantifies. I love this idea so much, and I feel like it's really different from their hacking stuff, but it's
Yeah.
still kind of the same. It's rendered. It's like very minimalist, just all black and white, and it's sort of this.
And you play at the same time, or
I haven't actually had a chance to play
Yeah.
this piece. It's like a big installation. I don't. I mean, I've only seen pictures of it. I don't totally understand exactly how the whole thing works.
I
But
mean,
it
it
has
sounds
all
really
these strings
interesting.
that kind of play all at once. Yeah,
especially since tic-tac-toe is so, I mean, famously, easy, right?
Right.
So to have AI set at different level of stupidity sounds really interesting. And with the way we are talking about AI these days, it's really topical. Uh, yeah, so it sounds fascinating to me.
I mean, I mean that's kind of different from a lot of the stuff that's going on. It's like this very minimal kind of
Yes.
focused idea, and I really like that. I mean, I guess that's kind of what I mean. That's kind of what I'm into with this stuff. There's other directions I mean, there's other 2 shows that me and my buddy did. They were a little bit different direction, a little more indie stuff, a little, we had Jason Rohr in one of them, but
Right.
yeah. Anyway, this show is more focused on kind of this minimal, kind of slightly. I mean, I feel like punk's not maybe quite the right word, but it's good enough.
It's communicating to me of, and having seen the show, I think it's actually quite apt.
Okay, cool, yeah.
Obviously, you're not talking about the violence of punk rock or
Yeah,
the
yeah.
aggressiveness. You're talking about that sort of raw energy,
Yeah.
and sort of a pushback against more commercial aspects, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, it's not like a lot of these games are not really about. They're not about beauty in sort of a direct way. You know what I mean? They're kind of more, kind of just going with the flow with
Yeah.
what appears and stuff like that. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You had a question.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing the show. It sounds like all the games or pieces that you've chosen have some kind of twist that sets them apart from what people would normally consider a game. So I guess my question is, kind of where do you see that line being that separates games from art, and do you see signs of the public growing to accept games as art more?
Yeah. I mean, it has a lot to do with goal, like having a goal in the game. I think. I mean, there's like I've read stuff. There's like certain elements, but I think having like kind of removing the goal or making it vague or things like that, or also just like being in like going for like a really long endurance to do certain things, like desert bus. Um, I don't know. I mean, it's a tough question. There's a lot of different aspects I think that you can kind of tune in and out. That like one of the shows I put Katamari Damacy, which I think is like I mean it's a game, but to me when I play that game, it has all the elements, it has the goals in it, but still it kind of just becomes this activity for me in this way. I don't know. It's a tough question. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of just doing this show to just kind of explore this idea and try to figure it out.
Yeah.
But I don't totally know. I just realized we did exclude one. We forgot to talk about one piece, which is we included this. Sorry, it just made me think of this. Like we did this. We showed a series of crack intros from the '80s, which are they're like when games were pirated and put on bulletin boards in the '80s. The hackers who would do it would often put these they would make these elaborate intros with music and graphics and kind of showing off various things. They're basically demos.
The demo scene, yeah.
Corey Archangel and this other artist curated a set of those in 2003. So we showed. I have a compilation of those that we're showing on a projector.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that's kind of like, I mean, it's not a game.
It's not a game.
But it's like sort of these artists who are doing sort of adding something onto a game, like so it's sort of a game modification. So anyway, like that thing is kind of off in this other area that is hard to quantify as well.
I mean, in a way, you do a show like this to ask that question. Not necessarily to answer the question, but to ask the question and to get other people to ask the question, I would say.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Were there other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the regional focus of the show, because you mentioned Tetris, which is Soviet, and then there are like Europe especially had like a lot of interesting amateur stuff in in the 80s and in the 90s. So I'm wondering like if you're going more for like U.S. Focus or also getting stuff from Europe or elsewhere.
It's a mix of you. Like the almost all of those the crack intros that I was just talking about are from Europe.
Yeah.
Jody's from Europe. Joan Leandra's from Europe. Fonways Ashmore's from Canada. I think, yeah, and then Tetris is. Yeah, I mean it's kind of a mix of stuff. Yeah, I would say it's kind of it for. I mean, my gallery's always kind of been that way. It's all been. My network is kind of partly just because I did shows in Europe and stuff. My network has kind of been there to some degree. So yeah. I was kind of, there's this, I know didn't write about it in the press release or anything, but I wanted to have this, there was this thread of U.S., there's this Cold War thread through the show. Mike built a shelter, NATO defense, including Tetris, and Corey's MiG-29, it's a Soviet plane. So yeah, there's sort of this little, I wanted to write about it, but I just didn't have time to kind of like form my ideas about it. But I just kind of put it through there, this little thread running through there.
Yeah, you should take a look at the Balance of Power. I have an original copy from the era somewhere around.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I'll have to dig it out, show it to you. Are there other questions? Yeah, Todd.
I guess you mentioned things a little bit like the CRTs or emulation on Raspberry Pi and stuff. I guess any thoughts or any interesting stories about trying to, with regards to preservation or recreating audio experiences of any of the pieces as you're trying to get the show?
I mean, it was mostly just. I mean, the I guess the getting Tetris working was the most involved because I wanted to get it working with a Cyrillic character set, which was a little challenging. I had to post on Reddit and get somebody to send me the manual for the terminal I was using, and it took a while. I wrote a Python script to convert the old, like whatever terminal code he was using into something that worked with the terminal I had. But most of it's just configuring, like, I mean, most of it's like configuring RetroPie. Like I use Retro. I mean, you can even just download the emulators, but it's honestly just easier to just install RetroPie and then like pick up the emulator you want. And yeah, I think just running it on a CRT is kind of the key thing because it looks so authentic. And then you can just buy like for Fonways Ashmore's Super Mario pieces. I mean, I just have it running on Raspberry Pi with a USB NES controller, and it feels so authentic. It's running on we have these nice Sony PVMs that we got for it. It looks really great. I mean, Corey is really particular about stuff, and I actually have. Oh, sorry about that. I have his is actually faked. I have actually some of them are faked. I have the NES there with the cartridge in it, but I've had trouble getting it working. So behind it is a Raspberry Pi, and he's fine with it. And Desert Bus is the same way. Like I bought Sega CDs are getting pretty expensive to get. If you want a working one, it's not cheap. So I bought an untested one off eBay, and it actually works, but it doesn't work very consistently. So
that's the one that doesn't have the sound running, right? Or when I was there, you fixed it. Oh, okay.
I fixed it. Yeah, it was a pain too.
Okay.
Wait, what was I saying?
You're talking about how hard it is to work with the
Authentic hardware.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So what I did with the Sega CD, so I set the Sega CD in front of the monitor. I have a real joystick plugged in. The cable goes under it, and then the USB is snaked under it, so you can't. I mean, nobody can tell because it's on. It's like, and you hear the CD running too. It's like it's really authentic, and then it's on a COT, so it looks great.
It
But
does.
what's really cool, I mean, I try to do everything on Raspberry Pi because, like, I use Commodore 64 as a guide because it's about 40 years old as to how hard it's going to be to like deal with something in 40 years from now.
Right.
So, like, Commodore 64 is just now starting to get pretty expensive and a little difficult to deal with. Like, you have to replace capacitors and power supplies and stuff like that. So I use that as a guide. But Raspberry Pi is about the same amount of units in, like, in the, around as the Commodore does. I mean, I think it's up to like 20 million.
Oh, right. There's enough of an install base. There's enough people who kind of know how it works.
Yeah, and
have written stuff for it.
And it's just it's a standard board. It doesn't have any memory on it, so there's not anything that we configured on it really.
Mm-hmm.
Everything runs off the SD card. So once you get it set up, you just archive that SD card, and then it's easy to replace. Even like you just buy one off eBay in 40 years and burn the SD card and plug it in.
Okay.
So that's kind of my strategy, and I do with everything. Like
I think I may have some of my old cassette tapes that I used for the Commodore 64.
Yeah.
That tape drive.
You're right.
It was one of my like earliest memories, trying to code and having that tape drive just go.
Yeah, it's really slow.
Yeah.
So kind of on that other thing, I picked up a cassette player, and I mean they stopped making cassettes, and I had to go to a place in Hollywood that had like a stack of them left, and I grabbed a bunch of them.
Oh wow.
Kind of because I mean, from the other direction, trying to archive things.
Right.
But then you make a very good point about the Pi and kind of how much through the decades there have a better bet that there be a community at least that knows
Around
about
it.
them, knows how to maintain them to some extent.
Sure.
And there's already some emulators for it as well that have been developed just for people to develop on them. But yeah, that's a good sign.
So we are just at time, unless there are burning questions. I think we're going to wrap it up and thank Paul again for coming,
thank
and
you.
really appreciate it. And everyone go see the show. So yeah. Let's give him